Hello, my name is Brandon Owen, and today I will be sharing with you my presentation on the research I'm doing into digital marketing on social networking platforms, the new frontier for modern marketing. First, I'll cover my thesis and purpose. I believe that corporate behavior on social media should be more closely regulated. I want to convince future marketing professionals and legislative powers that regulating how corporations can behave on social networking sites will benefit not only the competition within the market environment, but also consumers by protecting their data and limiting manipulative practices. First, before we dive into all of this, I really want to cover one of the main counter arguments that I see, because I feel that it's important for setting the framework of which I'm going to be approaching the rest of this conversation. And to start off, I'm just going to read this quote from my research. Essentially, requiring platforms to host content against their will arguably forces them to speak in violation of the First Amendment. Now, the same argument can be made both directions, that forcing a platform to host content or forcing a platform to not host content, which both of these could end up affecting either the consumer or the corporate entity. Either way, we must not encroach on the rights of these private companies nor the consumers. Nor can we assume that without outside motivators, that they will act on their own accord with the best interest of the general public in mind. So when I approach all of this, I want to make it clear that I think that a certain amount of legislation against digital marketing techniques is not a bad thing, but obviously we can't be overbearing in what we force companies, especially private companies, to not or to do certain things. And next I'm going to cover some of the main key concepts and then get into the meat and potatoes of my actual research. So, first I have social networking sites, which can be abbreviated SNS. A social networking site is an online platform that allows users to create a public profile and interact with other users. Now, social networking sites is kind of used as an all-encompassing term, but can cover two main different categories: social networking sites and social media platforms. Social media is typically associated with a platform that allows for distribution of ideas and connecting with new people. So it is a much more public-facing image that users can generate content on, or that consumers can target ads towards different segments of the user base. And then you have social networking sites, which are a lot more based around taking a network that you already have and just organizing that in a more efficient way to manage, share information with people you're already connected with, stay up to date on others that you care about, and potentially look through an expansion of your current network to try to find more people that you may have an interest connecting with. Next up, I have consumer data privacy. Now, this is one of the main concerns that many consumers have as we continue to develop into a more advanced technological landscape with new things that the internet allows us to experience and do. Consumer data privacy is the handling and protection of sensitive personal information provided by customers in the course of everyday transactions. So, the everyday transactions and online behaviors, and sometimes even willingly given up information on behalf of the consumer, is used by a variety of different places, either the business that collected the information or possibly even media brokers that purchase and resell personal information of consumers to other companies that might be interested in using such data to increase the effectiveness of their advertising campaigns or to target specific demographics that they might have an interest in. There's really a whole industry purely based around the use of this data, a lot of which is very sensitive and personal in nature. And that's where some possible legislation around what kind of data can be used and how it can be used may be an important conversation to have. Next up, we have new product development, abbreviated NPD. New product development, meaning that involves the ideation and design and validation and launch of new-to-the-world products. So this covers everything from the initial conception of an idea to developing what the product will be, testing that on applicable markets, getting validation and feedback from potential target consumers, and then launching the product out into the world and tracking the progress of that launch and marketing campaigns associated with it. Social media has created this new way of going through the process of developing new products, specifically because in the past, you were limited to using third parties to do research and like interact with the kind of customers that may want your products. But these days, people love being a part of the process of developing something new. And so therefore, social media has allowed for a greater dialogue in between businesses and consumers. Next up, I have corporate social responsibility, known as CSR, which refers to the practices and policies undertaken by corporations intended to have a positive influence on the world. So corporate social responsibility is a little different than general business ethics, because business ethics focuses on the desire of a business to make money for its owners and shareholders. But corporate social responsibility is a set of tools that is used by businesses typically to try to increase positive brand awareness and to increase sales generation based on doing things that are not only good for their consumers, but also the extended society as a whole. So it's taking into account how can you do good not only for the people who you immediately care about, but also people outside of that as a collective. And then lastly, I want to touch on social media marketing activities, SMMA, which are activities that use social media websites and social networks to market a company's products and services, which is the general practice that I will be discussing today. All right, so next up, I have some interesting statistics on social media use and why this discussion is such a big deal and needs to be had. As you can see here, I've listed some of the top social media or social networking platforms, and I've listed the total monthly users. This is in January of 2022. In the millions. So if you take a look, even at the lower end of the spectrum with these different platforms I've selected, Twitter has almost 500 million active monthly users, all the way up to Facebook at the very top, which has over 2,500 million monthly active users. Now, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of opportunity for corporations to come on in and do targeted advertising. That's a lot of data being collected. That's a lot of potential target segments of consumers that are being manipulated by these marketing practices, which can have a drastic, long-standing effect if not managed properly. So the actual paper itself that is guiding the research that I've done will cover three main areas: digital marketing on social networking sites, vulnerabilities of consumers, and the legal landscape, which is the main conversation, kind of getting into the conclusion and how I think we should move forward. So in digital marketing, I cover specifically data-driven marketing, because data-driven marketing is kind of like the poster child of the digital advertising age. That is utilizing the consumer data that's being collected on a daily basis, bought and sold by different entities, and then utilized to target specifically consumers that might be more interested in a particular product or service. Now, this process has created a greater efficiency and a greater engagement amongst these consumers. So it costs companies less money to access people who are more likely to actually engage with and make purchase decisions based on the advertisements that they see. So as opposed to the print and traditional media of the past, where the goal was much more broad, as in just get our stuff in front of as many eyes as possible. Now it's how can we pick the right eyes to present ourselves to so that we can have the highest return on investment. So it kind of completely changes the game, and that's why I discuss this data-driven marketing practice. It also improves new product development for corporate entities, as I previously discussed on a different slide, in the way that what used to be a much more complicated, time-consuming process has now been streamlined due to the extra communication that happens on social networking sites between corporations and consumers. Next, I cover the vulnerabilities, which consumer data protection is the huge one. Obviously, certain data is hard to kind of protect against, but especially the more personal in nature, such as medical or relational data or statistics on consumers can be very sensitive and stuff that it shouldn't necessarily be used to target advertisements with. And therefore, that's an area of concern that how and what data is collected is a problem, but then also how companies are able to use that data presents some potential problems. And then next we have mental health risks. Interestingly, in my research, I found that there is a direct link between high social media use and having a mental health diagnosis. Now, one study that I looked at ties high social media use to anxiety and depression specifically, but the other study simply ties it to a diagnosis for a mental health disorder. Now, this could mean that social media causes these mental health struggles, but it could also mean that people who have already had a mental health struggle, such as anxiety, depression, or social withdrawal, are more likely to desire using social media platforms to get some sort of a fix. I also observed that people who have a high use of social media, who all of a sudden don't have social media anymore, exhibit similar symptoms to someone who is struggling with drug withdrawal symptoms, which I find pretty interesting. So there's this whole other, aside from consumer data and corporate behavior, where social media itself may pose risk directly to the consumers, which might leave them more vulnerable to manipulation by these corporations. And then lastly, I talk about the legal landscape, limitations of current laws, because all the laws are for traditional mediums and not this new medium. So it's kind of like the Wild West in terms of what companies are able to get away with currently. I talk about the Banning Surveillance Advertising Act, which is a push for modern legislation that may drastically change how companies are able to utilize certain data in their advertising practices, which could be starting an important conversation of a lot of good and finding a better balance between free reign and not having the ability to advertise using data at all. Somewhere in the middle is where this legislation is trying to find. And then I cover corporate social responsibility and how companies can use healthy social media marketing activities to increase positive consumer brand awareness for the company, increase sales, increase the effectiveness of their ad campaigns, develop relationships with consumers, while also helping to create a more healthy, safe atmosphere for the companies and consumers alike. During the drafting process, well, before the drafting process was my main struggles, I guess you could say. In the research phase, I found it difficult to limit my scope. I took on a little bit more than I could chew, which delayed the process of drafting itself. So I have too many notes and numerous academic sources that I would love to incorporate, but due to the limited time of the semester, I had to simplify my drafting process, and therefore I wasn't able to do quite exactly what I originally hoped to. And this is something that I'll take a look at for future research opportunities to make sure that I properly address all these different things. And I look forward to continuing my research beyond this assignment as well. All right, awesome. Well, I know that was a lot and it was very dense. So now I want to open it up for questions, and feel free to send anything that you want to know over to me, and I will get back with you as soon as possible with some answers to those questions. Thank you for your time.